All members of the press and public will remain muted unless they have registered to speak, and the chairman will let them know when they can make their representation. The format of the meeting will be as per the agenda published. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Nicholson. Again, welcome to this committee. I'm Councillor Bob Filmer. I'm chairman of the committee. Again, just a few notes about how we'll be operating today. Each application will be taken in turn. The officers will outline the details of the application, followed by public speaking time. The members of the committee will then debate and decide on that application. For members of the committee wishing to speak, please indicate via the online chat and I will call you in turn. During the debate, there will be a proposer and a seconder for the resolution. Members will vote on this proposal in turn, confirming that they have been present throughout the application being considered and will vote for, against, or abstain. The votes will then be counted and the result announced. I will now ask the officers and councillors who will be taking part in this meeting to confirm that they can see and hear me and to introduce themselves. So if we can start with the planning officers, Mr. Howlett.
Right. Thank you, Chairman. I'm Stuart Howlett. I can confirm I can see and hear you, and I lead up the planning team here at Sedgemoor.
Mrs. De Vries.
Thank you very much. My name's Dawn De Vries. I'm the
Chairman, thank you very much. Yes, I can confirm I can see and hear everyone. My name is Councillor Graham Granter and I support the Fairfax ward here in Bridgewater. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Glassford.
Good morning, Chairman. Yes, I can see and hear everything and I represent Fairfax ward.
Councillor Pearce.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Cathy Pearce, Westover Ward, Bridgewater. I confirm I can see and hear everyone. Thank you.
Councillor Gibson. Is Councillor Lee Gibson present?
Hello. Yeah, sorry. I'm Councillor Lee Gibson from Eastover Ward, Bridgewater, and I can see and hear everyone present. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Scott.
Oh, good morning, Chairman. It's Councillor Liz Scott here from the Axevale ward near Axbridge. I can confirm I can hear and see everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hendry.
Good morning, Chairman. Sedgemoor District Councillor Alistair Hendry for Burnham-on-Sea. I can see and hear everything. Thank you.
Councillor Revens.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Councillor Bill Revens from North Petherton Ward. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kingham.
Yes, good morning, Chairman. Yes, I can see and hear everything, and I represent the West Polands.
And Councillor Bradford. Is Councillor Alan Bradford present?
Sorry. Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Sorry. Good morning to you all. Right. All loud and clear. Represent North Petherton Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Bolt.
Good morning, Chairman. Brian Bolt, Councillor for Cannington and Wemden Wards. I can see and hear everybody. Yep.
Thank you very much. Councillor Grimes.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Tony Grimes, Deputy Chairman, represent Barrow. I can see and hear everything. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's all the councillors, apart from obviously myself, who are on the committee. I would just remind both members of the public and council members that we do have members of the public who are present this morning with us. Some will take part in the meeting as speakers, some are here just to listen to the meeting, and we also have to come forward to address the meeting, and Mrs. Nicholson will enable the microphone so that you can give your address. I would just remind you that you are limited to 3 minutes for that, and what we will do is when you have 1 minute of that time left to go, I will give you a sort of verbal warning that you've got a minute to go, and so obviously if you can then wind your comments up to complete within the 3 minutes. If we move then on to item 4, which is declarations of interest, are there any declarations that members have for this morning? If you could indicate in the chat box if you wish to. Yes, if we start with Councillor Bill Revans, please.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. On item 7.3, which is an item to note, I have a personal but not prejudicial interest in the first item on that report, and for clarity and for transparency, I'd like to declare that now.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bolt.
Yes, with regards to the first application, 1320-00004, I'm the ward councillor for that in that area. I've taken no part in any consultations.
Thank you very much. Are there any further declarations that members have? In which case, again, for members of the public, it's important that you know if members have any background on an application that they're bringing to the table when they come to discuss it. Where you've heard a personal declaration, that means that they may have some background knowledge, but not such that it would prejudice their views in terms of making a decision on an application. Once that's declared, it's recorded, but they are able to remain within the room to debate an application and to ultimately vote on it. Where a prejudicial interest had been given, then that would mean that they potentially could be prejudiced, and therefore they would have to take no part in that discussion. They will leave the room and not take part in the vote. And where you've heard a member declare that they've taken no part to date, we have a standing order within our committee which basically says that members can either be involved at the town and parish level, or they can be involved at the committee level. They can't do both. So where you've heard a member declare that they've taken no part at the parish level, that's so that they've enabled themselves to remain part of this committee and part of the decision-making process on the applications before us. Item 5 we have before us today is the minutes, and you'll see from your agendas we've had 3 sets of minutes today. So if we start with the January 14th minutes, Mr. Nicholson, are there any amendments that you've had to those?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, there are 2 or 3 amendments for the minutes dating the 14th of January. The amendments are as follows. Councillor Filmer had declared a personal interest in application 06/1914 as it's within his Somerset County Council division, not his district ward. Councillor Bradford had declared a disclosable pecuniary interest in application 37/1897 as he owned land adjacent to the application site. And then on page 3 for the Axbridge application 02/1630, there's amendments to the following bullet points 3 and 4. So the third one should say the affordable housing obligation will include a local lettings clause to prioritise local need first before cascading more widely. And bullet point 4 should say Axbridge was identified as a Tier 2 settlement in the local plan, and the scale of the housing proposed was broadly in line with the levels of growth identified for the settlement under policy T2A of the local plan. That just is clarifying the issues. I have one amendment for the 3rd of March minutes, but we'll come to those in a moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other amendments to those? I have Councillor Kingham.
Yes, good morning, Chairman. Yeah, I'd like to move the minutes with those amendments.
Thank you. Could I ask if that's seconded?
I'm quite happy to second that, Chairman.
Thank you very much. That's Councillor Hendry. Rather than go round to every member to ask if they wish to support or oppose, I'm just going to ask at this stage, are there any members that do not support those being adopted as a true and accurate record of that meeting? I'm not seeing anyone comment, so I'm going to take that is accepted, and therefore we will sign those as a true and accurate record. We then move to the minutes of the 4th of February, which I believe we don't have any amendments that we've been notified of in advance. Mrs. Nicholson, just to confirm?
No, Chairman, there's no amendments for the February ones that I've been told of.
Thank you. Are there any amendments that members have to those minutes? If not, I'm going to look for a proposer that they are a true and accurate record. I believe I have Councillor Kingham.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I move those minutes as a true record.
And on the chat box, I've got Councillor Grimes.
Yes, Chairman, happy to second that.
Again, members, if I could ask if there's anyone who disagrees with those being a true and accurate record to let me know. I'm not seeing anything come through in the chat box, so I'm going to accept that those are a true and accurate record of that meeting of the 4th of February. And we then move on to the 3rd of March. Mrs. Nicholson.
One small amendment. Declaration by the Chairman for a personal interest in application 05/1924 as it's within his Somerset County division. Thank you.
Again, are there any amendments that members have for those? I have Councillor Grimes.
So moved, Chairman.
So you're moving it with the amendments as outlined by...
With the amendments as outlined, yes, thank you.
Councillor Kingham.
Yeah, I'd like to second that second those minutes.
Thank you. Again, members, if there's anyone who disagrees with those being a true and accurate record as amended, please let me know through the chat box. Again, I'm seeing no indications, so I will take that as a true and accurate record, and we will have those minutes signed. If that then moves us on to the next item on our agenda, which is the planning applications themselves. And we'll start with the application in Cannington. And Mrs. De Vries, I think you're going to introduce this one for us, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I've just presented the first slide, so members should see the title slide for 44 Rodway in Cannington. The application is for outline planning permission with all matters reserved for the erection of one dwelling. The application is before members as there is parish council support for the development, as it utilises an existing access and is not considered to impact on neighbouring properties or street scene, and by the parish council was considered to comply with policy D9, which is the relevant policy in this case. In terms of main considerations, as it's an outline planning application with all matters reserved, the main consideration for this case is the principle of development. The site is located outside of the settlement boundary for Cannington, as defined within the local plan. And as outside the settlement boundary, the question is, does the proposal comply with the self-build policy? And if not, if there's any other policies within the local plan that exceptionally allow for the development in the countryside. So the location of the application site is indicated by the red arrow and lies to the north of Cannington and is proposed to be accessed from Rodway. The existing site comprises one pair of semi-detached dwellings orientated side on to the road with the principal elevations facing south. There's one access currently serving these 2 dwellings, which is proposed to serve the additional unit. Members, please note the location of the site and, as shown on the left-hand plan, the low density and spacious arrangement of the surrounding dwellings. So in terms of the policy position, Policy S2 sets out the spatial strategy for the district to encourage development in the most sustainable locations. In the countryside, proposals for new development will be appropriately controlled, and development will only be supported where it accords with relevant policies of the local plan, which provide for sustainable and appropriate scales of development in the countryside. So policy D9 and CO2 support development in the countryside, subject to it meeting key criteria. Under policy CO2, it confirms that any site should be within a nucleus of existing dwellings, typically at least 10, infill the existing main built-up development and be of an appropriate scale and nature and acceptable in terms of landscape character. Policy D9 also requires there to be a demonstrable need for a self-build development and confirms support for sites considered to be well related to the settlement boundary. The settlement boundary is shown on this slide in green, with the application site located approximately 85 metres away. The site adjoins agricultural field boundaries and is sited on land that slopes down and away from Cannington, resulting in the site appearing distinctively detached from the main settlement, and as a result is not unfortunately considered to be well related. As part of the countryside infill development, it would have to form part of a cluster of existing dwellings, and whilst located to the west of an existing pair of semi-detached properties, given the distance between this and surrounding dwellings, it's not considered to form a cluster which would be subject to the infill development. As a self-build development has been proposed, there's no other local or countryside need that's been put forward to justify the location of this development. So the settlement boundary, as members all see, is green. So whilst geographically it's relatively close, will indicate the perceived distance and the poor relationship through the site photos. So the application site is indicated with white arrow. This is a view from the main road looking towards Cannington from Rodway. The visual detachment of this site from the settlement is demonstrated through the site photos, which confirm the more rural character of this site relative to the main settlement of Cannington. So this is a view from Rodway towards Cannington, and from Rodway towards the site, showing the existing screening of the properties. And this is a view of the existing access and the semi-detached dwellings. They're not particularly dominant within the street scene due to the position set back and the existing level of screening. And finally, a view from Rodway with a view towards Cummich. So the application site again is set down. You can see it's quite an open, green, sort of rural character. So in terms of the conclusions for this application, the site is located outside of the settlement boundary for Cannington, as defined within the local plan, and does appear from site to be separate from the settlement and rural in character relative to the main village, and therefore is not considered to be well related in terms of policy requirements. The proposal would therefore conflict with policies S2, D9 and CO2 of the local plan, and whilst we're satisfied it would be self-build development, it does not comply with the policies or any other local policies that allow for development in the countryside. Therefore, unfortunately, the recommendation is for refusal. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As you'll see, we have a speaker on this application. So, Mrs. Nicholson, if I could ask you to enable the microphone for Mr. Richard Dray.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can, Mr. Dray. I would just say you're quite faint, so if you can speak a little closer to the microphone. Just again to remind you, you will have 3 minutes to address the committee, and I will let you know when you've got a minute of that time left to go, so start whenever you are ready.
Firstly, I would like to sincerely thank you all for allowing to make representation in these challenging times. Before I start, I would just like to make note this representation is accompanied by a number of factual slides that unequivocally support the points made in the text. If any clarity is sought in what I'm saying, could I please urge you to review the slides? Sometimes a picture paints 1,000 words. Thank you. I'm convinced that this application unequivocally meets the government's intent laid out in the Self-Build Custom House Building Act. Sedgemoor Local Plan and Housing Needs Assessment for Cannington. I was born in 1972 above Hills Butcher's Shop in Cannington. My formative first 16 years with my mother, sisters and brothers, who all still live in the village by the way, provided myself with a strong sense of belonging, a place to fall back on, my roots. I then spread my wings within the military for 27 years, returning 3 years ago, a different person, one who understood the importance of community and roots. Unfortunately, a military life did not provide my children with a sense of permanence or roots, something we are very keen to support them in gaining. If I could please first draw your attention to the Plan Officer's report, which very importantly clearly highlights key supporting criteria for this application. He notes the following: the proposed site would adequately accommodate a dwelling, the proposed site would not impact on the host property, the application is supported by the Parish Council, there is potential for a dwelling to be sited without any significant impact to existing residents, and that the existing traffic calming measures would control vehicle speed and provide safe access off the road. So in summary, the single objection is one of principle based solely on opinion and perception on how well related the site is to the village. This is an opinion that I strongly disagree with and politely challenge. If I could bring your attention to the slide pack. Slides 1 to 5, the proposed plot sits 350 metres from the welcome sign to Cannington. From this signage to the proposed plot, there are a total of 14 houses, 7 static homes, a caravan site, a village sports and recreation ground. All of these dwellings form part of Cannington. They provide the community, the
estates, and there's a lot promised, a lot to come before planning, etc., etc. Yeah, and to me, the vague record. I haven't been probably by it for 8 or 9 months, so I'm vaguely I can't recollect it. Really, I can't see a great objection to it, if I'm honest. Local knowledge is paramount, and Councillor Bolt seems to come out that way at the moment. So I'm going to withhold my judgment at present, Mr. Chairman. But obviously, we're in difficult time, difficult circumstances. But normal times, we'd have gone and had a look, no doubt, a lot of the councillors, so to clarify their own mind. But it's not possible. So we are where we are. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll just listen to the rest. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have another couple of speakers, Councillors Grimes and Councillor Revens. So Councillor Grimes and then Councillor Bolt again. So Councillor Grimes first.
Thank you, Chairman. Very difficult application this, but unfortunately, as it says, it is outside the settlement boundary, where there's no sufficient justification for this application. So in that case, reluctantly, I will move the recommendation to refuse. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Revens.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. The policy test that this fails on, as far as I can see, is the phrase "well related to the settlement boundary." That obviously is a judgment call. I'm wondering whether there is a legal definition around something being well related to a settlement boundary, please.
Mrs. de Vries.
So far as the planning judgment goes, it's not a legal definition, and there's no, going back to I think an earlier question by one of the councillors, there's no set distance in terms of what is or what isn't well related. So in terms of geographically, you know, this photo shows a photo of the application site. So the semi-detached properties are sort of just behind the trees over in this location. This is a view heading towards Cannington. Technically speaking, the settlement boundary for Cannington is just 85 metres further down that way. But the judgment in terms of it being well related or not is an assessment in terms of geographical distance, yes, but then in terms of visual impact as well and change of character. So the settlement boundary 85 metres further back, then you come up this way, this character is a lot more rural than the main village of Cannington. And I think going on to the other slides as well, so the application site is quite well screened from the main road. It's got the existing vehicular access, but from the previous shot you didn't even see the house because it was well screened and set back. And then again a shot in the other location. So in terms of character, this character, albeit geographically quite close to the settlement boundary, has got a completely separate rural character to the main settlement of Cannington. So in terms of character and appearance, it's not considered to be well related, but it is a planning judgment based on each site's circumstances.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Bolt.
I think Councillor Revens picked up on the well-related comment I was going to make, except to say that it does seem very well related from local knowledge, as well related as a lot of the other housing around. And as it was pointed out, in fact, on that particular shot we can see on the screen, that's about 120 metres down to the next house, and we're only 85 from the boundary. Directly across the road from there's another house and one just down on the left-hand side, and a conversion which has just been put in opposite the other houses, which you can see. I can't see that this is not a well-related application.
Thank you. Mr. Howlett.
Thanks, Chairman. Just to pick up, in fact, I was going to speak when Mrs. de Vries came back on Councillor Revens' question and answered it much more eloquently than I could. In terms of the point, though, I guess it's just making sure what the purpose of the policy was. It's a relatively new policy. It's one that's come forward through the current local plan, wasn't in existence before. It was about allowing some wider flexibility to allow development around the edges of settlement where it didn't detract from the character, didn't create ribbon development, didn't create, isolated development. I guess in terms of the judgment here, those photographs are quite important in terms of defining whether or not you've effectively left or are leaving Cannington. And I think that's the key thing to think about here. the block plan, if Dawn, if you wouldn't mind going back to the block plan on slide 3, is it? I think, or slide 2. So the picture on the left does show that this is, this is a very dispersed part of Cannington. Once you get over the hill, over Rodway, it does feel like you have left Cannington, and I think that's the way that members should be viewing it. There's a significant amount of gaps between the development boundary and this site. Are we effectively saying then the principle of infilling those gaps is acceptable as well? Bearing in mind the principle of the policy was to tighten it down to allow some flexibility but not allow ribbon development into the countryside. Yes, it's a judgment value, but the policy principle here, I don't think that there would be anything to support a dwelling in this location.
Thank you. One question, if I could. Actually, I've just been advised. Could I just check? Is Alistair Hendry still in the meeting?
Chairman, it looks like he's lost connection.
Okay.
I don't know whether Mr. Taylor may be able to just see if he can get him on the phone.
If members can bear with us just for a moment, we will just
adjourn it for a
couple of moments, and then we'll adjourn for, should we say 5 minutes to give people a chance? Okay, if we adjourn for 5 minutes, we'll restart at approximately 12 minutes past 10. So if anyone wants to take a short comfort break at this point, you have 5 minutes to do so. I think probably we are going to have to make a restart, because we don't know how long this is going to take to resolve it. Obviously, it doesn't look like it's going to be. Okay, and if members just noticed from the chat room, we just had an update from Mr. Taylor that there are some technical issues that are having to be resolved with Councillor Gibson's connection, so that we're going to carry on. If just before I come to members, I believe Mrs. De Vries, you wanted to comment?
Yes, thank you.
We'll just say officially we'll restart the meeting again. So Mrs. De Vries, if you'd like to start again, please.
Thank you. It's just to provide a bit more comfort to members in terms of the policies that highlights that blanket policies restricting development should be avoided, and in some instances small villages and hamlets have clearly defined nucleuses of existing dwellings within the built-up area, forming a tightly knit cluster. Where a nucleus is of a reasonable scale, typically at least 10 dwellings, modest infill development may have limited impacts and may offer some support to local services at the settlement or in nearby villages, and so could be supported on that basis. The council is working on supplementary guidance about the cluster of 10 or more dwellings and how that works in relation to the self-build policy, because the self-build policy and CO2 need to be satisfied. And we have taken similar sites to this to appeal and have won with planning inspectors. The guidance isn't yet adopted but has gone through internal sign-off, so it is subject to external consultation still. But this site is characteristic of a number of sites which we have refused, and we have recently had appeal decisions supporting that position. But it is for members to debate it each on their own merit, so I will leave members to continue the debate.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bolt.
Thank you. Just try to catch my thoughts where I left off. Regarding Mr. Howlett's comments about ribbon development, I don't see this. I see ribbon development as where you're starting to develop outside of existing residential boundaries. This is well within the residential boundary of existing dwellings, but that's again, it's a personal basis, personal view, and I understand that all these applications are taken on their merit, and I don't know how many people know that area, but what Mrs. de Vries has just commented on is that there is a latitude for this development to possibly be acceptable. As I say, my train of thought was interrupted very slightly by the break, but it's just. I just don't see anything in the policy which is saying that this build can't go ahead. It's so well within the village boundaries that the impact is negligible. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Revens.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. A question first, please, if I may. I can see no reference to a neighbourhood plan in the document. I know Cannington started a neighbourhood plan some time ago. I was wondering what the status of that was currently, whether that's emerging and whether that is silent on the issue or not. Thank you.
Mrs. de Vries.
My understanding is they're working on one, but it's not advanced at any scale that we'd attach any weight to it as yet.
Okay, thank you very much. I think my dilemma with this is clearly this isn't isolated. I would also struggle to describe this as a tightly knit cluster as well. And my concern is, if we said yes to this one, are we in any way defining policy that would apply to similar situations elsewhere in the district? Or would it be wiser to wait until we have the policy guidance, which is awaiting confirmation, before we make a final decision on this? I'm still very much open-minded on this issue, and I'd be very interested to hear other members' thoughts. Thank you.
Mrs. de Vries.
The policy guidance has gone internal sign-off. So what needs to happen next is it needs to go out to public consultation. Due to the COVID situation, that's obviously been delayed, but it has been used in defence of appeals, which we have subsequently won. So we would be comfortable with a negative recommendation on this case, but it is for members to assess it.
Thank you. Councillor Kingham.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. It's not an easy one. You get the feeling that you would like to grant permission, but again, we do have a document in place, and reading the reasons for refusal, we have to go along with that because that's what we've got. And if we start to allow the individual ones, we're going to have people popping up all over the place. So I would like to go along and second the recommendation with Councillor Grimes.
Thank you very much. Councillor Scott.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I agree. This is quite a difficult one, really, but I do think that we have, we have a policy D9, and I regret, really, in its current form, that it's going to be very difficult to overcome this policy. So I actually probably can't support it, unfortunately. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Councillor Hendry.
Okay, again, Mr. Chairman, I was a bit open-minded about this, to be honest, all the way through, right up until now, actually, to be honest with you. I totally agree with Councillor Stuart Kingham, and although it'd be really nice to grant permission because the fellow may be local and all that kind of stuff, it goes against planning policy. So again, if you give it to one, then it opens the floodgates. So I'm kind of leaning now towards negative. That's the way it is, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm not seeing any other comments in the chat line at the moment. If any other councillors wish to speak, if they could indicate now. We have then a recommendation that has been made to refuse permission as per the recommendations in your report, which has been both proposed and seconded. So I will come round for the voting to each member individually so that we can record those votes. And I would also just remind you that you need to confirm when you come to make your vote that you have been present and able to hear and the presentation throughout the presentation that was made. So if we start, please, with Councillor Granter.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I can confirm that I have seen and listened to the whole report, and I am in favour of the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
And I will just clarify at this point for members of the public who are listening, just to confirm, the recommendation that has been moved is for a refusal. So if members are for the recommendation, they are for refusal, and if they're against the recommendation, they're against that refusal. So it can be a little confusing because it's almost like a double negative. But just to confirm that members of the public understand, if someone is for the recommendation that's been moved for refusal, that means they are in favour of refusing the application. Councillor Glassford.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I have seen and heard the presentation. I am for.
And you're for the recommendation?
For the recommendation, yes.
Thank you. Councillor Pearce.
Thank you, Chairman. I confirm I've seen and heard the whole debate, and I am for the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. I will come to Councillor Gibson, just because obviously, if you could give your comment. I believe you were absent for part of the meeting, so.
I was, but hello. I lost contact before then as well. The Sedgemoor server kept locking me out for some reason. So no, I wasn't present to hear all of the presentation.
Thank you, Councillor Gibson. We will record that as being absent from part of the meeting, but thank you very much. Councillor Scott.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I can confirm that I've been present and heard the whole presentation, and I'm for the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hendry.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure if I can take a vote here because my Wi-Fi went down, and then by the time I got it back up, I don't know if I actually missed anything or not. I'm unsure about this, so I don't know what to do, whether to vote or not.
Chairman, can I just clarify?
Yes, Mr. Nicholson.
Sorry. I don't think you did miss anything because we were adjourned while you were getting your Wi-Fi back up, and I don't think you missed anything.
Okay.
I was pretty quick on picking up that you dropped out.
Okay. Well, on that basis, I've heard the whole display. I've seen everything. I don't have any problem with that. And yes, I go for the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Revens, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I've heard and been attentive throughout the presentation, and I am against the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Kingham.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, well, I've been present and listened to all the presentation, and I'm for the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bradford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was loud and clear, heard all through the meeting, and I'm against the recommendation.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bolt.
Present throughout the application being considered and against the recommendation.
Thank you very much. Councillor Grimes.
Thank you, Chairman. I've seen and heard the full presentation, and I'm for the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And as the final member of the committee, again, I've been present throughout the whole of the presentation and heard and seen the presentation that took place, and I am for the recommendation that has been made. So, Mrs. Nicholson, if we could just confirm the numbers of the vote, please.
Thank you, Chairman. The results are 8 for the recommendation and 3 against.
And 1 absent, yes?
And 1 absent.
Okay, so that covers the 12 members that are present. So that was 8 in favour of the recommendation, 3 against and 1 absent, which means that the recommendation has been carried, so the permission on this application is refused. Right, members, if I could ask you to turn to the next application that we have before us today, which is on page 6, where we have a speaker present. And we're moving to the parish of Wemden. And Mrs. De Vries, if you again could introduce this one for us, please.
Thank you very much. Members again should have the introductory slide. The applications for erection of a single-storey extension on the side and rear elevations on site of an existing conservatory to be demolished, and a porch on the front elevation at 14 Boothway in Wemden. The application is before members as the parish council have objected due to the loss of a parking space through the removal of a carport that's on the side of the property. So the main considerations are principle of the development, the planning history, visual amenity, residential amenity, flood risk, and highway safety and potential impact on a public right of way. So the application site relates to a residential property within a built-up area within the settlement boundary of Wemden, indicated by the yellow circle and the arrow in this slide. And this shows the application site outlined in red and indicates the existing carport on the side of the dwelling and conservatory on the rear. There is no objection to the principle of residential development in this location, and members are to note the existing off-road parking to the front of the house, which is considered to be sufficient to accommodate 3 vehicles. There is a public right-of-way located to the east of the site that's shown on this plan with a purple line. It is outside of the red outline of the application site, so remains unaffected by the proposal. So this details the existing floor plan. Members will see the carport to the side and the conservatory to the rear that's to be replaced by this proposal. And the proposed ground floor. The next couple of slides show the consented scheme that's already been permitted on this site to the left and the proposed scheme to the right. So the proposal seeks consent for a wraparound extension to provide a sunroom, utility and bedroom ensuite. The current proposal seeks a similar layout to the previous consent on site, albeit relocating the kitchen from the east to the west end of the rear extension. So again, approved scheme to the right, proposed scheme to the left. The development is the same size and scale and design as that previously consented, so there are no objections in terms of design. The rear extension replaces an existing conservatory and therefore there are no concerns raised in terms of impact on neighbours. The only alteration is the change to the window and door arrangement on the rear elevation. So doing a direct comparison between the previously approved scheme and the current scheme, the consented scheme again is shown to the left and the proposed to the right. This type of change would have been acceptable as a non-material amendment, although the applicant chose to use their free go to address the change. So effectively on the consented scheme, they had sort of large double doors to the back, a door and a window. What they're currently proposing is a window, single door and another window. But in terms of size and scale, it's exactly as consented. In terms of context, these 2 images show a view from the public footpath and the rear of the dwelling. So the dwelling is just in this location here, public footpath, just going along the side, but outside of the application site, and a view of the front dwelling and the carport. And so members can assess the impact. This shows a photo from the rear showing the existing conservatory that's proposed to be removed. Given the history of the site and the minor changes proposed, there's no objections raised in terms of size, scale and design. Neighbouring property adjoining the site is at an elevated position, so there's no issues raised in terms of neighbour impact on the development. The site is located in flood zone 3, but was supported with a householder flood risk assessment, which confirms measures to be undertaken through construction. The development is therefore considered to be acceptable in terms of flood risk. Whilst the proposal will result in the loss of the carport area, the parking county standards requires the development of this scale to provide 2.5 spaces. Officers are satisfied there's scope within the site to provide this, and therefore no objection to the loss of the parking space. So in conclusion, the principle of extending a residential property in this location is considered to be acceptable. Given the planning history, really the considerations for this case come down to the material difference, which is the difference between the doors and windows on the rear elevation only. The visual amenity of the development is considered to be acceptable, and there's no adverse impact on neighbouring properties. The site is located in an area of flood risk, but is not considered to result in any adverse impact. And in terms of highway safety and impact on the public right-of-way, the right-of-way falls outside of the site and would not be affected by the proposal. The development will result in the loss of a carport, but there is sufficient space to the front of the house to accommodate for the appropriate required standards. So the application is therefore recommended for approval. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Again, members, you'll see that we have a speaker on this application. Mike Solomon is speaking on behalf of the Wemden Parish Council today. Mrs. Nicholson, if I could ask if you could enable Mr. Solomon's microphone.
I think I'm online now, yes?
Thank you very much, Mr. Solomon. Just to confirm, as you know, you have the 3 minutes to address the committee. I'll let you know when you've got a minute of that time left to go, and start whenever you're ready, please.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman. Councillors, officers, and perhaps especially the IT team, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you this morning. I'm Mike Solomon. I chair Wemden Parish Council. Let me first say apologies for taking your time this morning, because we agree with 99% of what Mrs. De Vries has said. We don't object to very much on this particular application at all. It is not our intention to object to every decision that planning department makes in Sedgemoor, but we really do want to highlight to you that the determination of this application is really completely dependent upon the provision of sufficient car parking space. You may well know, but Booth Way and the adjacent church path are absolutely chock-a-block with cars. All of the established grass verges along the side of the road have become parking spaces for the residents. Of necessity, we understand that. This application actually proposes the removal of an existing on-site carport parking space and proposes to fully pave over the front garden for car parking. Looking at the dimensions and the space available, we do not believe that that is sufficient room to park 3 cars, and Dawn correctly said that the neighbourhood plan, Wemden's neighbourhood plan, requires for a 3-bedroom house 2.5 spaces plus 0.2 for visitors, so 2.7 spaces, which, unless you can buy 0.7 of a car, that means 3. We can't get 3 cars on there. I really don't believe whether you park them forward, sideways, or whatever, and that is a requirement of the neighbourhood plan. The application notes that there's going to be a further application to highways for the front curbs to be dropped, so that will also take away an on-street car parking space. So it is with regret, I have to say, that as the application is not in compliance with the Wemden's Neighbourhood Plan Policy WB3, we just have to ask you to reject it. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Mrs. De Vries, before I come to members, is there anything you wanted to comment on?
Sorry, navigating screens. Just to highlight, in terms of paving over front gardens, that can be done under permitted development. They will require an application to highways to extend the drop curb, but if it's not a classified road, it doesn't require planning permission to remove on-street parking to extend an existing drop curb. It would be a highways application just to make sure the access is safe.
Thank you very much. Members, any comments or questions, please? We have Councillor Hendry and then Councillor Bolt. So Councillor Hendry.
Okay, Mr. Chairman. The question has to be asked, do all three bed houses in Sedgemoor have parking for 3 vehicles? Right? That's the first thing. And it's a very obvious answer. The answer is no. So if you take away this parking space under the carport, it's not going to make the slightest difference at all to the estate for 1 car. Given that there's already 2 parking spaces there, perhaps 2.5, you can argue, but there's at least 2. So all 3-bedroom houses, we're saying, has to have a minimum of 2.5 or whatever the case is. That's total nonsense, because this 3-bedroom house is going to have 2 spaces anyway. The street view would be vastly improved, because the carport that's there, with all due respect, it doesn't look very great at all. And the footprint of the new extension is no greater really than what's there already. So I have to go along with this and say it's very positive. I would vote for this, no problem at all. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Bolt.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a quick one. Is we say that we've already got the development in? They can get on and they can build now, taking down that carport. That's not part of the application, is it?
Mrs. DeRees, do you want us to clarify?
Yeah, because they've recently had planning permission granted for almost identical a scheme, they can build almost identical a scheme. Really, the difference that members should be focusing on would be the difference on the rear elevation, which is the only difference from the consented position. So if members were concerned about the loss of the carport has previously been agreed by the previous consent. So really that position's no different to what's already been consented on site. The only difference is the window and door alterations and alterations to the internal accommodation on the rear extension. So in terms of what we can reasonably consider under this application, it's just the changes to the fenestration at the back.
Councillor Bolt.
Thank you. I thought that was the case.
Okay, I've got a number of other councillors who've indicated. Councillors Kingham, Granter, Revens, Pearce and Scott. So if we start with Councillor Kingham.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Couple of points. Obviously, with increasing the parking space on the front of the house, also there's going to be a front porch, which obviously will protrude out. I would say this could obviously make it awkward for parking, whether that'll make any difference to getting the additional parking space back in. But otherwise, I don't have a lot of problem because we've already approved the scheme, and I don't see as much we can do as we've already approved one already. But just that porch, whether that would affect the parking. Thank you.
Mrs. DeRees, do you want to comment on the porch?
Thank you. The porch, as shown on this plan, does match the approval. So in terms of the size and footprint, it's exactly the same as previously proposed. The side elevation shows it's a fairly minimum projection into the car parking area. So officers are satisfied you'd still be able to pull a vehicle in ahead of the porch.
Thank you. Councillor Granter.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I obviously can't see anything at all wrong with this application. The applicants could go on and start taking down the carport and anything else. The only thing we're talking about today is a small difference which has been pointed out to us at the rear of the property. I think we're making quite hard work at this one, and I would like to support the officer's recommendation, and that's what I see nothing wrong with this whatsoever. Thank you.
Just to confirm, Councillor Granter, are you moving the officer's recommendation?
I am, Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Evans.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm happy to second that recommendation. Clearly, it's already been consented in terms of the objection from the parish council, but I would like the officer just to address the point about policy WB3 that she has said in her report this application is compliant with, but the parish council clearly disagree with her judgment, and I would just like to hear the officer's view on that, please.
Thank you, Councillor Evans. Mrs. DeVries.
Thank you. I'm just trying to get back to a plan. So the aerial, effectively at the moment, there's a hedge line across here that does prevent nose-in parking across the full frontage. So at the moment, vehicles come in and park under the carport, and there is sufficient space to allow for sort of another 2 vehicles, if you like, there. They would be reversing out into Boothway. Boothway is not a classified road, so in terms of highway safety measures, they don't need to be able to enter and leave the site in a forward gear. Taking that parking space away, there is considered to be sufficient width to be able to get 3 vehicles in. In terms of standards, county standards are an optimum level, so it's 2.5, but obviously people don't drive half a car. So we do tend to round that up to 3. based on the site circumstances, we are comfortable you can get 3 in there, and that is compliant with county standards and WB3 of the neighbourhood plan.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think I've got Mr. Howlett.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I was just going to say that it's quite an awkward situation, really, in many ways, because, you know, following on from what Dawn's just said about the judgment in terms of the parking, the officer on the first application has made that judgment that it accords with the parking. There's sufficient space to allow for the parking of the required number of cars. The parish council haven't raised objection on that application at that time. It's a delegated decision. No comments received from the parish council. The applicant now has that planning consent. It's a very strong fallback position, clear legal fallback position. They could build the previous consent out. They could make these changes under permitted development once it was built. So there really, unfortunately, it's one of those applications there really isn't anywhere for members to go on the basis of the process. The previous consent is a clear material consideration, not just a clear material, a very strong material consideration that members do need to take into account, which I know they're doing as part of the debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I've got a number of members who've indicated to speak, Councillors Pearce, Scott, Bolt and Bradford. So Councillor Pearce.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, as others have said, this application is the same footprint as the previously approved one, so I don't think we've got any grounds. I know this road very well, and it's a cul-de-sac, and it's not a really busy thoroughfare, so you know, I've got no problems with the movement of vehicles, and it would be quite wrong to oppose it, I think, for the sake of a third car parking space.
Thank you very much. Councillor Scott.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I agree. I just don't think that we've got any grounds to refuse this, so I'm quite happy with the recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bolt.
Yeah, Councillor Evans raised the issue I was going to do about WB3. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Bradford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's just a lot of history to this one, and I do think the planning officer got it right. Regarding parking, it's a nationwide problem. People should go to Wilstock and Stockmore to see the differences on these applications. But who knows what the world lies the next 10 years? You might not have motor cars. You just don't know. There's a lot of talk about people working at home, so the whole world might change. Who knows? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Are there any further comments or questions from members? I've not got anyone indicating at the moment. If not, then we'll move to a vote because we have a recommendation that has been moved.
Chairman.
Yes.
Sorry, I think Mr. Howlett wanted to say something.
I think he's already been in, but I will double check. Mr. Howlett?
Yes, I spoke. Thank you.
No worries. Okay, so if we move to the vote, we have had a recommendation to grant permission, which has been moved and seconded. Again, I'll come round to all members in turn. We'll start this time with Councillor Evans.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I was present, correct and attentive throughout the presentation and vote in favour of the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kingham.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I've been present and through the whole debate, and I'm for the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Bradford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've been seated throughout the debate, and I've heard all the things for it, etc. And I'm all for the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bolt.
I'm present throughout the whole application being considered and for.
Thank you, Councillor Grimes.
Thank you, Chairman. Seen and heard everything, and I'm for.
Thank you, Councillor Hendry.
I've seen and heard the whole application, Mr. Chairman. I'm very much for. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I've seen and heard the whole presentation, and I'm for the application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gibson.
Hello. Yeah, I'm present and aware throughout, and I'm in favour of the application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Pearce.
Thank you. I have seen and heard the whole presentation, and I am in favour of the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Glassford. Councillor Glassford.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I've seen and heard the whole presentation and I'm in favour of the officer's recommendation.
Thank you very much. Councillor Granter.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I can confirm that I have seen and heard all the debate and I am in favour of the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And again, myself, I've been present throughout the whole presentation and heard the information given to us, and I'm also in favour of the recommendation to grant permission. I think that's all the members who are present. Mrs. Nicholson, if you could just confirm.
Yeah, all councillors were present and the vote is unanimous for the application.
Thank you very much. So permission is granted. Members, I was just wondering at this point whether it would be sensible to take a short comfort break if members wish to step away from their screens for a while. Mrs. Nicholson?
Sorry, I was just saying 5 minutes.
Okay. If are members happy then that we take a 5-minute comfort break? If we aim to start again at 11 o'clock, that gives people a couple of minutes to stretch the legs. So if we take a short comfort break, then members will restart again at 11 o'clock. Thank you very much. Right, members, it's 11 o'clock, so if we can restart, I think we'll just have a quick run through to make sure everyone has rejoined us. So if you could just indicate that you are here. Councillor Granter?
Yes, Chairman, present and correct.
Thank you. Councillor Glassford?
Chairman, present and correct.
Thank you. Councillor Pearce?
Yes, Chairman, I'm here.
Councillor Gibson?
Here.
Thank you. Councillor Scott?
Yes, Chairman, I'm here.
Councillor Hendry?
I'm here, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Revens?
Present, Mr. Chairman.
Councillor Kingham?
Present, Chairman.
Councillor Bradford? Councillor Bradford, able to hear us?
Present, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Bolt?
Present, Mr. Chairman.
Councillor Grimes?
Yes, Chairman.
Excellent, and I'm here as well. So if we make a start then on our third application today, which we move to West Huntsville. And again, Mrs. De Vries, if you could introduce this one for us, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Members should have before them the opening screen for Croft Farm, Withy Road, West Huntsville. The application is for a change of use of an ancillary cabin to become an independent dwelling. So the application is before members as the ward member and parish council both support the application on grounds of medical needs, on the fact that there's no impact on neighbouring buildings through overshadowing, overlooking, no landscape impact, and the development was considered to be appropriate in terms of design, landscape and materials. So the main considerations for this application is the principle of development, planning history, visual impact on residential amenity, access and parking, and flood risk. Moving on to slide 1, it's an aerial shot showing Croft Farm and the application site. So the application seeks consent for a separate dwelling to the rear of Croft Farm, which is indicated with the blue arrow. The site is located in the countryside and comprises an existing agricultural unit comprising a host dwelling and a number of agricultural buildings to the south and west of the building. Slide 2, Croft Farmhouse is shown circled in green, and the proposed single-storey cabin is shown circled in blue to the rear of the main dwelling. Slide 3. So this sets out the policy position. So policy S2 sets out the spatial strategy for the district to encourage development in the most sustainable locations. As per the previous application this morning, in the countryside, development will be appropriately controlled and development will only be supported where it accords with the relevant policies of the local plan. Policy D9 and CO2 support development in the countryside subject to it meeting key criteria, although due to the location of this site, it would not be well related or acceptable as an infill development within an existing cluster of policies. properties. Alternatively, policy CO1 states that where development proposals in the countryside are not addressed by the policies of the local plan, new development must demonstrate that there are specific countryside needs. Whilst the applicant has cited there are personal reasons for the application, they are not related to a specific countryside need and unfortunately would not therefore comply with these policies. So moving on to policy screen 4. The proposed layout of the cabin is detailed as a 2-bed unit. A lawful development certificate was granted for a caravan in this location, same size and scale, although it was confirmed through the lawful development certificate that the caravan would be used as ancillary accommodation in connection with the host dwelling. If used as an independent dwelling, as now proposed, it would create a separate planning unit which requires consent. The size, scale and location of the caravan was not previously considered as the development was lawful, and as ancillary it would have been within a cluster of existing outbuildings within the garden area of the host property. Screen 5. This image shows typical elevations as a separate unit given the single-storey nature of the development and separation distance from the host dwelling. There is not considered to be any adverse impact on the character of the area or the amenities of the host dwelling. Slide 6. The access to the site would be from Puriton Road, which is a separate access than that serves Croft Farm, which is from Withy Road. From this perspective, the single-storey building would appear as part of the surrounding farmstead. Slide 7. Currently, there are no boundaries defined between Croft Farm and the siting of the cabin, although this could be controlled by condition to ensure no adverse impact. Notwithstanding the lack of local impact in terms of visual amenity and wider character, this in itself would not be sufficient to address the policy conflict in terms of the introduction of an additional dwelling contrary to policy. Slide 8. In addition to this, the site is located in flood zone 3. Single-storey accommodation was accepted as there is safe refuge for the occupiers within the main house. As the applicant's intention is to occupy the cabin separately and sell the host dwelling, the proposal would result in highly vulnerable development in an area of high flood risk, which in itself would be contrary to policy D1 and advice contained within the MPPF. So in conclusion, in principle, the proposal would result in a new dwelling in the countryside which would not comply with any of the exceptional policy requirements. The development would therefore be contrary to policy S2 and CO1 of the local plan. In terms of planning history, the lawful development certificate granted for a development of a similar size scale to the current proposal, although accepted this due to the ancillary use of the building in connection with the host property. There are no concerns in terms of visual impact or residential amenity, although this in itself would not address the principal conflict. The site is capable of being accessed and separated from the host dwelling and provide adequate parking, but the site also lies within flood zone 3, and therefore a single-storey separate dwelling would result in a highly vulnerable use in a high flood risk area, contrary to policy and guidance. The application is therefore recommended for refusal. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members, are there any comments or questions that members have, please?
Ooh, pardon.
Councillor Bolt, would you like to start, please?
Yeah, I haven't asked to speak.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, I was looking too far up my list. I've got
could have been Bradford.
Councillor Pearce. I've got first then.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I think the whole thing about this application is really, for me, around the flood risk. And as the report says, the siting of this cabin would be 1.23 metres lower than predicted flood levels. And so I really think it'd be irresponsible for us to agree to this application.
Thank you very much. Councillor Kingham.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, this is obviously a difficult one because I printed off the agenda and I read through it, and there are quite a few things within there. I know it has been supported by the parish council and two other members of the council. But again, as Councillor Pearce said, we have to be consistent in this, and this is within the flood zone. I appreciate that the applicants wish to sort of move here as a retirement home and sell the business, but I think to be consistent with other applications we've seen and had in the past, and we've refused on these grounds, you know, I can't really support this on the grounds of that it's actually within a flood zone. I'll wait for the debate to continue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Grimes.
Thank you, Chairman. Unfortunately, I could not support this because of the serious flood risk. There's no upstairs to vacate to if there is a flood. And so in that case, I would reluctantly move the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bradford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It seems to be the one issue, the flood zone. Can I just ask, when was the last time it flooded? Has it flooded?
Mrs. De Vries.
I don't actually know the answer to that. Apologies.
Sorry, Dawn. Sorry. You know, I'm quite a practical fellow, and sometimes this flood zone thing is not all it cracks up to be. I don't think it is sometimes, but it is a very difficult one. This is again affecting people's lives, what we're doing, and I think I'll probably go along with the majority on this one. I think.
Thank you, Councillor Hendry.
I completely agree, Chairman, with Councillor Tony Grimes. He couldn't have worded it better, to be honest, and I'm happy to second the recommendation. Thank you.
Councillor Scott.
Oh yes, thank you, Chairman. I have to go with the recommendation. It is a difficult matter, and I just wonder whether it is the right dwelling in this area. Perhaps the applicants could look at doing something else. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pearce.
It was really just in response to Councillor Bradford's comments. It's my understanding that it's not historical flooding, but it's the fact that, according to Met Office predictions, sea level is likely to rise by up to 2 metres, and the increase in the tidal swell is the issue.
Mrs. De Vries, do you want to comment on the flood risk aspect?
I must admit, I saw Stuart typing, so I was hoping he was going to come in on this one.
If you want to pause for a minute, we'll go with Mr. Howlett, and I'll come back to you if you want me to.
Lovely, thank you.
No worries.
Yeah, I mean, it's based on a series of things in terms of flood risk. It's a theoretical flood risk, but whether or not they've been flooded before or recently is irrelevant, because if you're a 1 in 100 year return or something like that, then clearly you might be due one. So, effectively it's based on very broad terms in terms of flood mapping on levels and likelihood of, breaches and rivers rising. So it's a theoretical risk, but it's based on a potential reality in terms of what would happen. And in this case, of course, the difficulty is the flood risk assessment wasn't particularly great either that was submitted. So we've probably not got a huge amount of information to go against the policy position or the theory. But in a sense, if you're flood zone 3 and you're a cabin, that's pretty high risk. You don't get much more vulnerable than that. So there would clearly be a policy position to object to this scheme on flood grounds.
Thank you very much. Members, are there any other further comments or questions? Or Mrs. De Vries, do you want to add anything?
I think the only thing I was going to add was, as pointed out by one of the councillors earlier, the finished wall level of the proposed cabin is over 1 metre lower than the proposed flood risk, and the applicant has some vulnerabilities. So in terms of ethical position, we wouldn't want to be putting anyone at flood risk, but particularly vulnerable users.
Thank you very much. If there are no further, yes, there are. There's one further comment coming. Councillor Kingham.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So reading through the agenda, say one of the parish council's supporting application on medical needs. I'm not sure putting a a single story dwelling on a floodplain when somebody has medical needs is really the right thing to do. And I think we're going on the right lines by refusing this application, which would probably mean that maybe they could find a better solution to their problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think lastly, Councillor Bradford.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. This is very much a thing of common sense, I think. That's all I'm going to say really on this one.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Got you all smiling. Boris was the only one that took.
Thank you, Councillor Bradford. If we move then, I think I've got no further indications from members they wish to speak. So we'll take the vote in turn. So this time we'll start with Councillor Grimes.
Thank you, Chairman.
Just to confirm, the recommendation that has been moved and seconded is to refuse permission for the reasons outlined in the report. Sorry, Councillor Grimes.
Thank you, Chairman. I've seen and heard everything, and I'm for the recommendation.
Thank you. We then got Councillor Bolt.
Yeah, present throughout the application and for the recommend.
Thank you. Councillor Bradford.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I've heard all the debate, been here all the while, and I support the planning officer very much so.
Thank you. Councillor Kingham.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I listened to the debate and I'm for the recommendation from the officer.
Thank you. Councillor Revens.
Seen and listened to all the presentation and debate, and I'm in favour of the proposal.
Thank you. Councillor Hendry.
I've seen everything, Mr. Chairman. I've heard everything, and I'm obviously in favour for. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I've seen and heard everything during the debate, and I'm for the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gibson.
Hello, yeah, present and aware, and I'm for the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Pearce.
Thank you. I've seen and heard the whole debate and am for the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Glassford.
Thank you, Chairman. I've seen and heard the whole presentation. I'm in favour of the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. And Councillor Granter.
Thank you, Chairman. I can confirm I have seen and heard all of the presentation, and I am in favour of the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. And likewise, I've heard the whole presentation, and I'm also in favour of the recommendation for refusal. So, Mrs. Nicholson, if you could just confirm the numbers for the voting, please.
Thank you, Chairman. The vote was unanimous for refusal.
Thank you very much. Therefore, the application is refused. Right, members, that brings us to the end of the planning applications we have before us this morning. But as you know, we have some reports which are on your agenda under agenda item 7. So if you could turn in your pages or on your screens to agenda item 7.1, and I think Mr. Howlett is just going to take us through the reports. Mr. Howlett.
I will, Chairman. You'll have to bear with me, I'm afraid. I'm struggling to open them at the moment, so just bear with me. I will try and open them. Bear with me.
No problem. Hopefully, members, if you find them, item 7.1 is the planning appeals that we've received. And I'm not sure if Mr. Howlett's mic is on, or whether... Mr. Howlett, would you like Mrs. De Vries to present these while you, if you're struggling with the reports?
My mic was off. You probably heard me mouthing, but it's just as well my mic was off, Chairman, at the moment. I'm struggling to open the files. Dawn, are you able to open them and show them, and I can talk through them?
I've got 7.1 presented.
Okay.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Carry on then, please.
Okay, yeah, so if you can just scroll down, Dawn, please. There's a number of delegated items on here, so which are less relevant. So I'll skip through those unless members have got any questions on them. So these are appeals that have been received recently. The bottom one's the most relevant. So 17/18/34. Members will recall that this went to committee on early March. It was recommended for permission. Members overturned the recommendation, and that was for outline residential development at Steert Farm, Wedmore Road, Cheddar. So the former Sainsbury's site as it was. So the appeals come in already on that one. In terms of procedure, it will progress as written reps. So it's a case of watching that space. I don't know if there's any questions on those.
I've got no indication as yet as to how
Okay, next page then. If you keep scrolling down, again, mainly delegated, I think, on these ones. The middle one, 24/19/19, has a committee relevance. This was the application that was refused a little while ago now. I think it was end of last year by members. Again, in terms of it was a retrospective application for the change of use of a building to be used for an office and domestic garage out at Eastfields, out at Old Bristol Road, and some members may recall we did have a site visit out there as well. So that application's come in as an appeal. That again will follow the written reps procedure, and we'll update you as things move forward on that. Okay, I think that's it for those ones.
Thank you. Any questions members have got on 7.1? If not, we'll move on to 7.2, appeals decided.
Thank you. So again, not huge numbers of committee relevant applications, but the top one might be of interest, which is an appeal decision on land to the east side of the Mercure Hotel. This was about a digital advertising board. Members will know the Mercure Hotel, I'm sure. They'll also know the timber fencing that sits on the front, which used to be quite a large advertising hoarding. It's in different ownership to the Mercure, and the third-party interest had applied to put a really large advertising board virtually right in front of the bar windows of the Mercure. The inspector agreed with the officer's decision to refuse that application, and that's received a little bit of publicity this week, I think, certainly on social media. The other one which has a committee relevance is the one at the bottom, and we did sort of touch upon this without naming it earlier during the Cannington debate, which is the Pay Farm application. And again, members will recall it was fairly soon after the local ban was adopted, and our first real trial of the self-build, the infill policy in the countryside. And you may recall that Overy Parish Council and ward members did come and support that application, and it was quite a long debate because it was really the first time we tested that policy. But ultimately, members went with officers and it was refused, and the inspector has endorsed that decision. So that becomes a really important appeal decision as we move forward. Okay.
Thank you. Any questions from members on 7.2? I'm not seeing any in the chat at the moment. If not, we'll move on to 7.3 and certificates of lawfulness.
Yeah, so again, a reminder, these are applications for certificate of lawfulness where people have demonstrated that either they are beyond enforcement or they don't require planning permission. Most of this list do include ones where they've demonstrated over time non-compliance with particular conditions, etc. And you'll see there's quite a list of different ones. None of these come to committee, so none of these are committee decisions. They are a legal determination as to whether or not the evidence demonstrates that legally they are lawful. So again, if there's any comments or any questions, happy to pick those up.
Again, members, I'm not seeing any indication in the chat at the moment. In which case, we'll move on to 7.4, which is the Section 106 agreements.
Yeah, so these are the Section 106 agreements which have been signed recently, and they show movement on applications which do have some relevance from committee. Land east of Wedmore First School, that was a Section 73 application. It didn't come to committee eventually. One of them did come to committee, but the second one didn't because the parish council withdrew their objection at the last minute, so I think it appeared on the papers. That's simply confirming that the applicants have confirmed that they will comply with the deed on the original Section 106. So it's a technical legal matter, but that's been signed and the decision has now been issued. The middle one, Stafflands Farm, 43 dwellings. That's part of the allocation out at North Peverton. So went to committee some time ago, but the Section 106 has now been signed and a decision issued on that one. And one at the bottom, Liney Road, Weston's Oyland. There's been a number of amendments on this scheme. It was a full application for 43 dwellings. This was the latest amendment, and as part of the need to issue the decision, we've had to sign a deed of variation on the Section 106 agreement. So that's been completed, and that decision has also now been issued.
Thank you very much. I think we have a question from Councillor Kingham.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I didn't see it on the list, but I'm not sure whether it's been approved or not yet. The Persimmon site at Chilton Polden, has the 106 all been agreed on that site?
I don't believe the 106 has been released yet, Councillor Kingham. No, it's still under negotiation.
Okay.
Thank you, because I get the parish council keep querying it. That's all. Thank you.
No problem. Any other questions on the 106 agreements from any members? If not, that brings us to the end of our business for this morning. I believe Mrs. Nicholson has got a couple of reminders that she wants to raise with members before we conclude this morning. So, Mrs. Nicholson.
Thank you, Chairman. Just very quickly, many congratulations. It seems to have gone relatively well. Obviously, a couple of technical issues, but I think on the whole, really well done. Just a quick reminder, I think majority of you were really, really good about putting your mute on, taking your mute off. Absolutely fantastic. I do override a couple of people and I do mute people. So please don't get upset about it. It's just that we can hear things going on in the background that we don't want. And also, can I just remind you, you should have all had a pair of headphones. If you could use them. Oh, Councillor Granter, you're shaking your head. Probably because you didn't tell me in the first place. So I will add you into the list in due course. But I'll email you about that.
Can you add me on as well, Leila, please?
Yeah, I'll email you as well, Alex. Then. But those that have got headphones, could you please use them? I know they're not the most beautiful of objects to have to put on your head, but it does make a big difference. A couple of people that weren't using them, you can hear quite a lot of distortion and what have you. Whereas if you're using the microphone with the microphone relatively close to you, it's a much clearer audio for people. But other than that, that's brilliant, and we'll see you again about 2:15 this afternoon.
Okay, just before we finish, I've got Councillor Granter wanted to raise something.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. It's a question for Mr. Howlett, please. As you know, the development that's taken place in Northgate with the new Aldi store, when that was passed by the committee that we would look at a new road layout and a new junction. Obviously, it's coming to completion, the new store, and we're still stuck with the same road layout. And I wonder if you've got any news at all about when we're going to get a new junction there, please. Thank you.
My understanding, Councillor Granter, is that there is some hold-ups for the technical approval stage, which is done by the Highway Department, obviously at County Council. There has been quite a bit of discussion toing and froing between the parties, and I know the Audi contacted us to see if we can help unlock that. So there are discussions going on to see how we can do that. But yeah, it's all tied up with that process that follows after planning, I'm afraid, in terms of the technical approval and the safety audits of that junction.
All right, thank you.
Okay, again, thank you everyone for your involvement this morning. I think, as Mr. Nicholson said, it has gone pretty well for a first time. Just to remind you, the East area applications this afternoon will be commencing at 2:30. So hopefully we'll see you all this afternoon at 2:30. Thank you very much.